Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Ann Gillies. I want to talk to you today about something pretty serious. Most of the stuff I talk about is serious, but I think it's time to shake out the cobwebs and to really expose what's going on. Even though I've been trying to do that for many years and several others have, we need to get down to the bare facts. So last week, former BC Pride President Sean Girales was found to be facing sexual crime charges, including two related child pornography charges. And then he was charged with sexual interference, sexual exploitation, possession of child pornography, and the distribution of child pornography. He was a very active man. So he is the head of one of BC's pride groups. And I was online kind of looking to see comments in social media, and it was like people were shocked. And I'm like, give your head a shake, people. Give your head a shake. We need to look at the facts. We need to understand what's been going on for decades within the LGBTQ community. And I mean, Lord, help us if we dare say anything out of line regarding homosexual men or someone within the community itself, that there may be some deviance there. Well, it's time to get past that and to face the reality and to expose what's been going on. This does not mean that every single person in the LGBTQ community is a pedophile. Of course not. But when you listen to some of the statistics, you were going to find out that there is a lot of nefarious things going on. So in 2018, 2017, I wrote a book called Closing the Floodgates, Setting the Record Straight on Gender and Sexuality. And I'm going to read some excerpts from chapter 8. So I'm just going to read these to you because I want you to understand that this is nothing new and that we need to understand and protect our children from predators. And you have every right as a parent to do that. And that means that you may have to speak out and speak up against these people. It doesn't matter if they are homosexual. It doesn't matter. There's perversion. We need to address it. So let me begin. This is how I began chapter 8. In darkness, it's easy to believe a lie. It's easy to embrace values that seem to be right, but aren't. It's easy to believe something that feels good is good. In darkness, it's easy to lose your way and stumble. You might even take a life-ending fall. That's called death. We are in free fall in Canada, in the US, in the Western world. And I believe we are living in a time of nearly impenetrable darkness. This darkness has been propagated by lies, and most serious of which is that there is no absolute truth, and therefore there's no morality. And people, we have allowed this to happen under our watch and agreed with it. So while we may have been able to keep our heads above water for a time, our culture is now in jeopardy of drowning. And we're drowning slowly as we stand by and watch the darkness surround us and say nothing. We need people who will shine a light in the darkness and expose it for what it truly is, evil. As a society, we've been rewiring our brains for decades, rewiring them out of pleasure systems to make that which is inherently unpleasant pleasant, to make that which is painful pleasant. That's a perversion in itself. You know, a perversion of what is decent, healthy, and wholesome. That's what's been happening for decades. You know, perversions cause people to organize their lives around activities that mix aggression and sexuality, and often celebrate and idealize humiliation, hostility, defiance, the forbidden, and the breaking of taboos. These individuals feel special for not being normal. Boy, that talks about a whole community. Sexually abusing children is inherently wrong. Just because an individual's brain is molded to seek after forbidden does not mean that we as a society must join them in this kind of atrocity. Calling sexual abuse intergenerational love and intimacy, as Ken Plummer did in 1991, is a devious attempt to insulate society from the reality of child sexual abuse. He says contemporary concern over pedophilia and child sexual abuse usually rests on uncritical and under-theorized conceptions of childhood sexualities. Okay, in case you didn't understand that, let me read that again. Gets us a lot of psychobabble, right? Contemporary concerns, so parents' concerns over pedophilia and child abuse usually rests on uncritical and under-theorized conceptions of childhood sexualities. So let me clarify. So concern over pedophilia and child sexual abuse is basically because we, mostly parents, don't know any better. Yep, we don't know any better. Parents stop needing to be concerned. It's perfectly normal, say the professionals, say the academics. And if you don't believe that, you better start looking at what's being taught on pedophilia in university settings. It's being taught. So let me talk about for a second, it's perfectly normal. Some of you may remember that there's a book that's making its rounds in public schools called It's Perfectly Normal. All kinds of diagrams of children having sex. That's called pornography. And yet your children are getting a steady diet of this garbage. Male intergenerational intimacy, Plummer softens the term because he doesn't want to be blunt and call it incest, uses the language of child love, consent, joy, willingness, and choice, the language of desire. This is what you're hearing now more and more as we talk about what's happening in our public education and DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yeah, we just have to include everyone. Plummer also says that such incest is in the child's best interest. Yeah, it's hard to imagine, but that was 1991. But hey, it goes back further than that. This view, though, constructs a world of childhood where children are naturally sexual. That's what they're being taught from like daycare on, and that adults may help them to joyfully explore their desires. Plummer's not alone. So let me talk about Tom O'Carroll, who in 1980 was charged with conspiring to distribute child pornography. And he authored, and he did time, thankfully, he authored Pedophilia, a Radical Case, and claims that the children's natural sexuality should not be denied. In fact, denying having sex with children is liable to cripple these children. He advocates for pedophilic rights by muddying the waters to suggest that children will be less than fully developed, or worse yet, crippled by not experiencing early childhood sex at the hand of adult males. This is 1980, remember? Goes back before that, but we'll just stick with these. Hopefully this gives you a little bit new understanding of the love is love slogan, which I absolutely abhor, because within the community, love is love includes this child adult sex idea, that it's okay, that pedophilia is okay. In 2014, the New York Times ran an article, and it was called Pedophilia, a Disorder. Do you hear that? It suggested really that pedophiles are born this way, and therefore they're not responsible for their behavior. Have you heard this before? Of course, we've heard that from the 60s with homosexuals, born that way, born that way. It's been drummed into our heads for decades. And then in the last 15 years, this is what the transgender, used to be called transsexual, but the transgender group have been trying to push down our throats. We're born that way. We have a girl brain or a boy brain. You see, it eliminates them from taking responsibility for their behavior. So in 2014, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual tried to reclassify pedophilia as an orientation, and I've spoken on this before. But once it didn't pass, thank God, but that was 10 years ago. And our culture has been on a roller coaster trying to promote this for the last 10 years. So the next DSM will probably classify it as an orientation. And when that happens, remember, it becomes okay. You cannot, it's no longer a crime. You can't prosecute it. You can't do anything. So parents, if you don't rise up soon, there's going to be no hope to protect your children. Well, I continue in chapter 8 to expose some of the individuals that have been charged. So Duke University, an official and associate director of the Center for Health and Policy at Duke University, his name was Frank Lombard, offered up his 5-year-old adopted son for sex. He ended up getting caught doing this in a police sting. He himself, Lombard, had molested his child, whom he adopted as an infant, and he'd allowed others to molest his child. Now, this begs the question, what does molesting mean? Did he touch the child? Did he rape the child? What did he do? He stated that the abuse, now interesting, he was charged with molesting, but he calls it the abuse of a child is easier when the child is too young to talk or know what's happening. He was sentenced to 27 years. Not long enough. Not long enough. You abuse infants and think it's okay. Then San Francisco's gay icon, Larry Brinken, was guilty of felony child porn possession. He was found guilty. He had pornographic images of children, get this, between the ages of 1 and 3, who were being sodomized and forced to perform oral sex with adult men. So if you don't think that pedophiles prey on babies, give your head a shake. Yes, they do. These are homosexual men who are raping babies. If you are not irate yet, you should be. 4 men came forward then for someone else to accuse Ed Murray, Seattle's homosexual mayor, of rape. Like, these are, okay, there's an incident here, there's an incident there. Why is nobody picking up on this and linking this together with the community? Because that's a no-go zone. So in 1984, Ed Murray was investigated for sodomizing his foster son. Here we have a theme here, adopted child, foster son. These are men who can't have children, so they adopt them, they foster them. Yep, he was investigated. And the CAS worker said under no circumstance should Murray be given another foster child. So he is the mayor of Seattle at this time, and he was, accused of rape. Well, nothing came of it. Then a 5th young man came forward in 2017. So all these years go by. What's this guy doing? He isn't sitting back twiddling his thumb. Once you go down that road with child sex, all of a sudden stop. These are pedophiles. So the fifth individual was his cousin, who was 13 when Murray forced him to have sex. Murray was in his 20s at that time, and it was in the 1970s. So this goes back to the 1970s. In 2017, he is still the mayor of Seattle. Is there a problem here? Yes, it wasn't addressed when it first came to light. He wasn't convicted. Where are the judges? This is intergenerational sex. That's what it's called. And that's what's promoted within that whole area of child sex. And although there were previous allegations, Murray was still acting as the mayor and coasting smoothly along. He has now stepped down. I don't know if he actually did jail time. You know, pedophilia is polluting our whole society. In 1983 to 1984, there was a random study of over 3,000 adults done in Los Angeles, and it found that 3.8% of men and 6.8% of women had been sexually assaulted in their childhood. 93% of the assailants were male, and only 1% of the girls had been assaulted by females. So we know this to be true, that the vast majority of pedophiles are men. Absolutely. So get this, approximately 35% of the assaults were from homosexual. They were homosexual assaults. Okay, think of the population of homosexuals, at least within the LGBTQAI++ community in the 80s, and think that 35% of the assaults were homosexual. Then at the Clark Institute of Psychiatry in Toronto, there was a review of two quite large studies that calculated that approximately 34% of the offenders against children were homosexual. 34%. Even though 97% of the population is heterosexual. Start wrapping your head around this. In cases that doctors Freud and colleagues actually handled themselves, they accounted for 36% of the pedophiles. 457 pedophiles, 36% were homosexual. In 1986, there were over 4,000 adults asked to report on these sexual advances in elementary or secondary school with teachers. 4% of those teachers in the survey claimed to be heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual. 29% of the advances by elementary teachers were homosexual. And yet, the community was under 3%. In addition, 25% of reports of actual sexual contact with an elementary school teacher was homosexual. In high school, 22% of the contacts between teacher and pupil were homosexual. A 1987 American 10-state survey found 199 sexual abuse cases involving teachers. This is in 1 year. In 59 of these cases, male teachers had abused male pupils, and in 4 cases, female teachers had abused female pupils. Overall, 32% of the abusers were homosexual. 32%, and yet the community is very small. This disproportionate percentage was found. 29% of adult children of homosexual parents have been specifically subjected to sexual molestation by the homosexual parent. Compared to, okay, so 29% of children who are raised with a homosexual parent have been sexually molested. Whatever that means, it's on a continuum, right? So that could be from anything from touch to rape to sodomy. That's compared to only 0.6% of adult children of heterosexual parents having reported sexual relations with their parents. Okay, heterosexual parents abuse 0.6% of children. Having a homosexual parent appears to increase the risk of incest with a parent by a factor of 50. So I can attest to that. I unfortunately married a man who began to have, well, he'd had homosexual affairs before we married, and he began to have more and more of them. I found out 3 years after the divorce and after I remarried that he had sexually abused his children, he and his boyfriends. It's real, folks. Of 52 child molesters convicted in Ottawa between 1983 and 1985, so that's 2 years, 31 or 60% were homosexual. Prior to 2010, a study after study produced estimates that those who identify as LGBTQ range between 2 and 3%. Overall, perhaps 2 to 4% of adults regularly engage in homosexual activity, yet they account for approximately 1/3 of all child molestation and abuse. This potentially makes the rate of homosexual molestation approximately 20 times higher than heterosexual molesting of children. Let me read it again. It potentially makes the rate of homosexual molestation abuse approximately 20 times higher than heterosexual abuse. There is a pattern here that suggests a prevalence of pedophilic behavior among homosexual men. Let me state it again. The pattern, the stats are there. That shows that there is a prevalence of pedophilic behavior among homosexual men. Get that through your head. This is not trying to beat up people. This is stating facts. And you are responsible to learn the facts so you can protect your children. Many of these men are teachers in our public school system or have very, very high level jobs where they have access to children. Heterosexual parents make up nearly 97%. I know you've heard this from me before in this presentation. I just want to push it home. The population of heterosexuals is really still very high. Maybe there's 10% really that are engaged in homosexual behavior regularly. And yet, the heterosexual parents abuse about 0.06% of the children they raise. Yet 3% of gay parents abuse 29% of the children in their care. Significant. And nobody wants to talk about it. In fact, probably since the late 80s, academia has shut down any research on this, on really presenting the facts. Have you heard that before? Of course you have, because research by paid statisticians, and particularly within the levels and the ranks of academia, is very biased. So such statistics that I've been giving you today are declared to be myths by LGBTQ activists, and the science is just said to be junk science. The rewiring of our pleasure systems through sexual experimentation actually can change the sexual tastes of a child or adolescent, resulting in what we now call sexual fluidity. We've been rewiring children's brains for decades, sexualizing them in our public education systems. What's happening is that this will create more and more levels of deviancy within our culture as our precious children first are victimized And then some of them will become the perpetrators because they're being told it's okay. It's okay. This is natural. This is normal. Sexually abusing children is still viewed as a crime in Canada and in most of the world. Yet the tidal wave of sexual indoctrination is pushing us further into the grips of pedophilia. Are you going to rise up? Are you going to protect your children? Are you going to look at the facts and be honest about what is happening in our culture? Thanks for listening today. I know it's been a little long. So my book is on Amazon, at least so far. It's called Closing the Floodgates, Setting the Record Straight on Gender and Sexuality. I suggest you pick it up and read the whole book. It'll wake you up to a whole lot of reality. Thanks for listening. Check out my website, restoringthemosaic.ca. Check out my podcast, my other books, and I'll talk soon. Bye-bye.